Thank you very much, Joe, for your very kind words. And I would very much echo the comments that you've made in relation to John Carney. And I want to thank John personally for his invitation here this morning. John, as you know, is now the CEO of the NCSE for a number of months. I agree with Joe. You will have to stick with it, but you do have that deep personal commitment, as Joe says, and I know that you're completely dedicated to the cause, and you're bringing your energy and commitment to this area, and I very much certainly appreciate and I just want to acknowledge that. I do want to take the opportunity to acknowledge Martina Mannion, who's here, my Assistant Secretary from the Department of Education as well, who does a Trojan amount of work in this area as well. She'll be embarrassed that I'm mentioning her, but I do want to mention her because she works very closely with me, as does John, in relation to this area of special education. And we know, obviously, that there's been benefits in the adoption of online platforms, obviously, particularly over the last couple of years. But it's lovely to see everybody here, to have the opportunity to speak with each other, because you can often have conversations on the fringes of these types of conferences that can be enlightening, and you can share those experiences with you, and you can learn important pieces of information over a cup of coffee more than sometimes just listening to people like me speak. So it's great to see such a gathering today, and I do want to welcome obviously the online contingent that are listening in today also. As we all know, good research is a key component of the policy-making process, and we're very lucky in this country to have a highly respected and a valued research community. And I've met many of you in my role as Minister of Special Education and Inclusion in many of the engagements that I've had, and I've been very impressed, not just by the way in which you go about your work and the outcomes of this, but also the passion that you have for learners on the margins and for those with special or additional educational needs, and for those that are most at risk of disengaging from the education system, and for the measures that are needed, required to keep these learners on track. And the NCSE itself has many important tasks, including this research function. And I know the importance that the NCSE and indeed the Council attaches to that function, and I want to acknowledge that. It's not easy to maintain that important focus on research when there are so many other competing demands in relation to the planning of new special classes and special school provision and the allocation of resources to schools, and particularly the pressure that I may put on the NCSE on occasion to deliver on those measures that need so badly to be put in place. But the importance that the NCSE assigns to this research function is very much reflected in the organising of an event today like this conference. And of course, the research programme conducted by the NCSE informs another core task, that of providing policy advice to me at present as Minister for Special Education and Inclusion. And in that regard, the programme that is planned for today is both important and highly relevant to how we continue to structure our school system and the supports necessary for young people with special educational needs. And I'm particularly struck by the importance of two themes at this particular conference: the post-pandemic education and indeed the experiences of transition into and from school. And I don't think we can overstate the importance of having up-to-date research in both of these areas. It's of course hugely important for us to learn the experience of students, teachers, school leaders and parents during the COVID period, and that's where that research comes in. But it's vital, firstly, that the research community is focused on this issue, and secondly, that we can apply the learning from completed research into our policy development for our young people, but most especially for those with special or additional educational needs. The availability of high quality, peer-reviewed research supports effective policy making. And while this is probably true for most government departments, it's especially true in the case of the Department of Education. And we know how quickly things move on in the world of education. We know that the pandemic impacted significantly on schools, on teachers, on principals, and most importantly, on our children and our young people. Moving learning and teaching from the classroom to an online environment was really challenging for everyone in the education system, but we do know that most children and young people are resilient, and they have reconnected back with school in quite a straightforward manner. But we do know that the online world was particularly challenging for young people with complex educational needs. So reading early research reports on the impact of the pandemic on young people with special education needs prompted us to ensure we provided a broad range of measures as soon as possible, all aimed at mitigating the particular challenges that young people with SEN experienced both during and after the COVID period. So the measures, as you know, included the supplementary programme, an expanded summer programme, and indeed the class programme. And I had the opportunity to visit a number of different schools offering the summer programme this year, and I was never less than impressed by the work of the teachers, by the SNAs and the school leaders in ensuring that the programme focused on young people who most needed it. Looking at the programme for today, I note that both Irish and European research relating to the impact of the pandemic will be presented. And the Irish research on this topic is hugely important for obvious reasons. However, it's also great to be able to hear about other education systems in Europe who have managed to navigate their way through the challenge of meeting the needs of learners with special education needs. And in that regard, I also welcome the presence of Dr. Bilgeri from the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education today. You're most welcome. The second theme for the conference, the experience of transitions to and from, into and from school, is equally as important, I think, as the post-pandemic learning theme. And I have particular interest in supporting young people with SEN to make optimal transitions from their school, be that to the world of work, to further education or higher education, or to adult disability services where appropriate. And some of the data, I think, relating to it is quite worrying. People with disabilities are only half as likely to be in employment as others of the similar working age. And the reasons for this, as we know, are complex. They include levels of education and skills, fears around loss of benefits, employer know-how, low expectations, and a limited re-entry to work following onset of a disability, as well as higher incidence of ill health. And the National Disability Inclusion Strategy Implementation Plan contained a commitment to publish a comprehensive employment strategy for people with disabilities. So the 2015 to 2024 strategy was developed as a cross-government approach that brings together actions by different departments and state agencies in a concerted effort to address the barriers and challenges that impact on the employment of people with disabilities. The strategy was developed following detailed interdepartmental discussion, a consultation process with disability interests, including input from the disability stakeholder group, and discussions with employer and trade union bodies. So implementing the strategy requires continuing intergovernment and interdepartmental cooperation and a joined-up approach to supports and services for job seekers and for workers with disabilities. And there's also an emphasis on local levels of support for individuals on their journey into and in employment. And the Department of Education is committed to implementing Action 1.4 of the Comprehensive Employment Strategy. And in that regard, we are required to develop and demonstrate an approach to transitions for young people with disabilities to improve access to and opportunities for post-school options. But I'm delighted to announce that 20 schools located in Dublin and Galway have agreed to participate in a pilot programme which will support young people to make the best transition possible from school. So each school will be provided with an additional 12 teaching hours to assist them in supporting young people over the school year and the following year. A project coordinator has been appointed to lead out an engagement with the schools, and the NCSE will play a lead role in overseeing the impact of this programme. So in keeping with the theme of today's conference, research into the effectiveness of the pilot is obviously going to be key, and essentially we will need to know whether or not what we have put in place actually works well. So we also need to keep an eye on the future so that research will be a critical element of any decision made regarding scaling up the approach followed in the pilot programme. So there are obviously many other aspects to successful transitions. For example, the vital importance of ensuring that teachers in junior classes in primary schools are enabled to build on learning that has occurred in early years settings. And I'm sure many of these aspects will be touched on during the course of the day. But earlier I acknowledged the importance of the NCSC as an organisation that it attaches to its research function. And this work is led and supported, of course, by the NCSC Council. And I understand that the tenure, and I know Joe mentioned it, of the current NCSC Council is coming to an end in the coming weeks, and I want to warmly acknowledge the role of the Council led by Chairperson Joe Hayes over the last 6 years. I want to thank you, Joe, in particular, for your stewardship and your leadership of the NCSC over this period. I also want to acknowledge Professor Emer Ring and her labour of love, as she calls it, in relation to her book, and I look forward to reading it in 2023. I want to wish the rest of you a great conference. I hope you get to have great conversations that will inform your choices and decisions for the future in relation to special education. Thank you so much for the invitation here today.